introduce a bit more our panel, the purpose of our panel. I want to also point out what is at the bottom of your screen, the Slido. For the ones who have been joining in the last few days, some of the session, you are now very familiar with it. For the ones who are not familiar with Slido, just go online, slido.do, and then you are asked for a hashtag. So you have the hashtag below, and this is where you can ask your questions, and we'll take your questions at the end of the session. We'll make sure we're keeping time for that. So today, we want to continue the conversation on localization. Localization is and has become a major conversation in the humanitarian sector, much less in other aspects of aid, because it is happening a bit more, even though it can be better and it can be improved. And one of the conversations we have had during the last 2 days at the European Humanitarian Forum is also how can we get inspired from the other sector of aid, and how can we learn from it. And I'm really happy that today we have a diverse panel who hopefully is going to be also able to tell you and to tell us a little bit more about that in particular. Today we're going to focus on coordination, and why and how coordination is key to localization, and what are the different mechanisms that exist, how they function, how they are funded. But we want to, taking the advantage of the diversity of the people we have online, we also want to take advantage of that and explore some different questions around overhead, which are critical for local actors, especially regarding coordination, not only, but also regarding coordination. I'm going to stop here. I'll have more time to come back on the different issues. And before I introduce the panel, before I introduce our different guests, I would like to invite Manuel Fontaine, who is the Director for Emergency Program at UNICEF, to give us some opening remarks. Emmanuel, the floor is yours. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Alex. I hope you hear me well, and I hope everybody hears me well. So good afternoon, good morning. I'm Manuel Fontaine. I'm the Director of Emergency Operations in UNICEF, and I'm calling you from New York. So for me, it's the morning, but for a number of you, it's already the afternoon. So a couple of just points from my side and from the UNICEF perspective on localization. I mean, first of all, thanks to the organizer of the European Humanitarian Forum to organize a talk on today, really take stock on localization in humanitarian aid, because this is really an important topic. We all know it comes back from the outcome of the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, and somehow, interestingly, and maybe sometime the silver lining, but what we've lived through the COVID crisis, and now also some of the other crises around Afghanistan, maybe Ukraine right now, really kind of puts in the forefront the localization agenda even more, for a number of reasons that we can talk about a little bit more. Now, localization, we're also very happy to see that it appears on the IASC priorities, humanitarian interagency priorities for 22-23. Martin Griffith, as the ERC, was very clear on that, and so he certainly wants to put that push that as one of his priorities. Now, for UNICEF, we're trying to look at localization in a rather comprehensive way, and so I'll go through that a little bit, because it is important for us to really go beyond the indicator of the World Humanitarian Summit, which is basically the transfer of funds, or how much the fund is being transferred to frontline national local organization in general, and have something that's a little bit stronger and a little bit more systematic. So for that, we have a rollout plan that we're planning to roll out, as the name indicates, over a strategic plan period, which is 22-25, and just started now. So there's 5 elements to that, which I think are important, and I think really would be important to our discussion right now. One is obviously the investment in the institutional and technical capacity of local actors, whether it's national authorities, civil society organization, communities, private sector, actually, in some cases. The second is really respecting, strengthening leadership and coordination. This is what we're going to talk about more today, of humanitarian action by national and local organization, by CSOs, by communities, having them a lot more in the driver's seat when it comes particularly to coordination and leadership. Obviously, it's engaging in principled partnerships. This is important. We're humanitarians. We have humanitarian principles, humanitarian space. We want to work together on what it means to be principled together in crisis response. It is really about adopting a comprehensive risk management. We seem to be always very focused on the fiduciary risk, on the financial management risk, which is one aspect, but then there's a lot more to that. There's duty of care for frontline organizations and frontline workers, and there's clearly security risk management. And then, of course, where possible, supporting multi-year agreements and funding. This is really an issue. I was back in Central African Republic in December. I've just came back from Afghanistan. There's, everywhere where you talk to local organizations and national organizations, the issue of the duration and the predictability of funding is extremely important. So something we definitely need to work more on. Now, when you look at the work at UNICEF we've done, we've certainly tried to promote the UN partner portal, which is, as you know, belongs to 5 different UN agencies, and I think is really a good way for partners or for frontline organizations to partner with us and CSO. It is also just at the moment, I think 20,000 CSOs are actually registered on the UN portal. So it's a really fair, open access to organizations to the UN to partner with us. In 2021, UNICEF transferred $2.5 billion to 9,400 organizations in general, partners in general, both humanitarian and development. But I think what is important when you look at the humanitarian context in particular, close to 30% of humanitarian funds were actually transferred in cash to local partners. So we've passed, if you will, the 25%, but again, that's not everything. And at the country level, it's more than half of our UNICEF country offices that have actually at least 25% of the humanitarian funding transferred to local responders. So just very briefly on the coordination, because this is really important. UNICEF is obviously cluster lead for WASH and nutrition. We're co-lead with the SAVE on education, and we're also lead on the area of responsibility for child protection. The way it has been translating actually is really to try to bring local actors to take up leadership positions in our clusters, and we're trying to do that. So, for example, in Juba, in South Sudan, we've supported a local actor, TOCH, T-O-C-H, to really lead the child protection area of responsibility. They're working actually quite closely with Save the Children. The same way in Colombia, in Nigeria, I think it's the Grow Strong Foundation, and in Somalia, where again, some coordination roles at national level or subnational level has been taken on by local organizations. And in Iraq, the Global Child Protection Area, AOR, is also partners with Save the Children to have the participation of 10 actually local actors, including local government, actually in the leadership of the area of responsibility at subnational level. And then just to say, by May, there will be 2 local actors also engaged at the global level with the Global WASH Cluster and its strategic advisor in its strategic advisory group. So coordination, try to put local organization at the center, and happy to really measure that more regularly so that we can together report back on where we are. Thanks. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Manuel. Let me ask you a very quick follow-up question. It's great to hear all the progress made on including local actors in leadership position. But how are you in a position to also support them to engage in terms of resources, for example? Because we know that international organizations, NGOs or UN agencies have staff, and that's part of their institutional capacity, right? But a lot of local and national NGOs don't, and therefore that often hinders their ability to engage in a regular way, to have also the capacity to know and to have the right people in the right position.
Yes, yes and no. Yes, because there is, when you conclude the partnership agreement with UNICEF, that can be built and should be built into the budget that you need the staff to do this and that. And yes, they should be supported and helped to have actually that staff. When I'm saying no, is there are two issues. One is, and again, that's what came out in some of my recent missions. Often the partnership agreements we give to local organizations and to international organizations, by the way, is often quite short because it's often limited by the duration of the funding we actually also receive from our donors. And you know that humanitarian funding is often limited in terms of duration length. So that's a problem. And so we can only give the flexibility and the duration of what we have. So this is a discussion to have with the donors, but we need to make an effort. I think there are some cases, I have to be very honest with you, whether I think our country offices or teams are actually even more conservative, and they should not. They should really try to extend as much flexibility and duration as they can to the agreement. The other thing is it's sometimes a bit difficult to fund the headquarters, what we call the headquarters cost, the kind of flat percentage that we're giving to some international organizations, because for some reason the headquarters being in the country, it should be built into the project agreement. This is something we're working on, just to mention that, because I know it's important. We need just to give that capacity and share that, that I mean, of course, the resources, but of course, capacity is not only resources, it's also, as I said, all the work we can do on security, on saving lives together, on other things, and technical support in general. But so yes and no, we're doing some, but we could do better. But really, national organizations, I mean CSOs and others, when you submit a project proposal to UNICEF, just bill in your cost. This is important. Thanks.
Thanks, Manuel, for that. I think that's a good element to know for our local actors who are online today, but also something to continue to build on and to be stronger about, because we talk about leadership a lot, and we talk about local actors to take leadership and to really have agency, but we do know that if funding is not everything, funding is still necessary to be able to do quality work and to really represent the voices of communities and organizations. And thank you, Manuel, for that. We'll come back to you. I want to jump to our next speaker with a question that really follows the conversation we had so far around coordination and how this is happening. So I'm going to turn to Marina Skurik. She's the Chief System-Wide Approaches Practice Section at UN OCHA. And she has been leading an essential piece of work to sort of continue to push localization within the UN system, especially within the coordination of the UN system. So for the one who don't know, there is a guidance which was released and adopted last year on localization. The name is a bit longer than this. It's around strengthening leadership, coordination. But it is really about coordination, and some of the issues Manuel just talked about are really at the heart of this guidance. So, Marina, I would like to ask you a bit if what Manuel is saying about how well or how quite well they are performing in the global clusters and national clusters is widespread among all the international coordination mechanism in countries and globally. Or if you see some disparities, and what are the other challenges or lessons that you have learned since the release of this guidance? Over to you, Marina.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I think a lot of what Manuel said really resonates. I mean, certainly, there isn't a unified view on localization, first of all. We speak about the same thing, or we think we're speaking about the same thing, but we sometimes have different views of what that looks like. And certainly, I think the shape and what localization looks like and feels like in Mogadishu, in Port-au-Prince, in Kabul will differ, which is normal. We're looking at different settings with different social and historical backgrounds. So certainly, I think the fact that we have guidance is great. The fact that it's now in place and it's something good, but I think the question is, as they say, the proof is in the eating and the pudding. So the question is, how are we going to put it in place? So we as OCHA have committed to actually tracking the statistics on this. And the statistics are actually not as disheartening as one might think. So, we know that 49% of cluster membership globally is local organizations. which is great. The question is it tokenistic membership or is it true membership? And Manuel spoke about leadership, and leadership to us is critical. So for us as OCHA, leadership and participation are critical, but they have to be meaningful. And I think we're still at this point where we're looking at numbers and tracking the numbers, and we'll have to also move the needle on the how meaningful is it, and is it true sharing of power or not? And that sharing of power is really critical too, because I think one is, we know, I mean, I'm very proud as OCHA, we're at 39% in terms of allocations from country-based pool funds to local NGOs, which is excellent, way past the 25%. But when we look at global statistics, 5% of direct funding goes to local NGOs. That's just simply not enough. And it is not as simplistic a funding. It's not only about funding, it is about power sharing. It's also about humility. As a system, we need to be more humble. We need to really not just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk. And the sharing of power comes, requires certain changes in habits, which isn't easy. So one is, I think we'll continue to track. We have some excellent examples where some countries have really gone up by leaps and bounds, and others are still hovering in quite low statistics. We also need to look at proxy indicators. So for example, if we know that 14% of clusters have transition strategies, which actually just look at how to transition to local actors, that's perhaps not enough. So I think we need to really look at the various indicators and see how we can improve. I mean, I think there are two more things I wanted to flag. One is the issue of responsibility and accountability, and that's the other side of the coin. I think it's great to have local actors participating, but it's also understanding there's a certain responsibility that comes with participation. It's also about consulting and representing the rainbow of different constituents that you are there to speak for. And then, we also know that local actors are not necessarily always benign. Neither are international ones. So Manuel already spoke to humanitarian principles, and that's absolutely critical. The issue of risk sharing is one which is painful. I think it's also one that we really need donors to be much more engaged in and look at it critically, because that's also often a challenge in terms of being able to allocate more funding to local NGOs. So there's a lot more that can be done, and there's a lot more we can do. I think one is, I'm going to transpose a common adage, which is, it takes a village to, well, I think it takes a whole community to turn the needle and to move the needle on localization. And that means not just OCHA, which is often sort of seen, and we do have a responsibility as with our coordination mandate of really coordinating and pushing that envelope, but it actually requires every part of the system, the donors, the UN agencies, the international organizations, and the local actors to actually really activate themselves and take responsibility and make commitments of what they're going to do. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marina. And thank you for pointing out, I think, a number of really important elements. You talked about power. And we have a tendency to make localization a very technical conversation, and it is also a very technical conversation, but it's not only a technical conversation. It's also a very political conversation, because it is about sharing power, because it is about making space for others, which requires from everyone a lot of humility. And that's sometimes difficult. And we are all human beings. Organizations are not just institutions. They are people behind. You talked about one key element, I think, around the transition plan. And transition is a critical point, and that's often one of the criticism that happens, right? I mean, OCHA doesn't have coordination mechanism in all countries. It has coordination mechanism in many countries, but not in all countries where we have crises that are requiring action. And the transition element is critical because local actors are there, and they will continue to be there after OCHA coordination mechanism will be over. So this transition element is critical, and having those networks that are already existing, sometimes working in parallel, and not being included in international coordination mechanism in country. I think those are this kind of critical element where people need to learn to work together. Pooji, I would like to turn to you, to hear a bit your views on this. So, let me first introduce Dr. Puji Pudiono, who is a senior advisor of Pudiono Center in Indonesia. But beyond that, Puji, we can't see you, Puji. I think there might be a little
Can you
challenge.
hear me?
We can hear you, so at least we can hear
Okay.
you. So, but beyond that, Puji is a great convener. He's a convener of local and national NGOs in Indonesia. A convener of local leaders across Asia, and he's also taking an active role in representing local and national voices globally. Um, and Puji, I want to come to you in your capacity as a convener and as a person who has a deep knowledge and experience with local and national NGOs. Uh, in terms of the coordination mechanism, of course, but also in terms of what do you see as capacity for local and national NGOs? There's always so much around the fact that we need to invest more in their capacities, but don't they have capacities already? And how can we see that better? How can we use that better? How can we put that more in the front of the conversation? Over to you, Puji.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, colleagues. Pardon me, I cannot show the video. I cannot work it out essentially, but you can hear me. Let me take the last part that you asked me about the capacity, right? In my view, looking at the reality from the completely local perspectives, I believe we do have capacities, but our capacities may not fit nicely into the international community's definition of humanitarian capacities, right? Now, that's clearly a way to have a better matching of these two. Let's look at our local colleagues, my colleagues here on the ground. We might be vegetarian, we might be pescatarian, but we don't call ourselves humanitarian for a start, right? That's a joke. But clearly, we are advocate organization, we are development workers, we are women's group, youth group, you name it. But very rare that we call ourselves humanitarian organization. So we do have capacities to create movement on the ground, to sustain, public services and so on and what's not. Now, our capacities are not created, not shaped necessarily for humanitarian. However, when the crisis happened on our front yard, if you like, then we have to raise to the occasion, we have to respond to that using our capacity, whatever we have, right? Now, number two, I believe all crises in the world are locals, right? I believe there is no such crisis that are not locals. Some of them are so large that they become national crises. And very few of them are so phenomenal that become international crises. But by far, all crises are locals. And most of them are small. It doesn't hit the headlines. It doesn't become the news. But those are our crises. And we respond to them. Right? Now, the challenge and opportunity in front of us is how can we build a wavelength and frequency so that our local colleagues could speak to Marina using more or less similar language, a logic that approximate each other so that we can work together in that very rare but very important occasion that's called international crisis. But otherwise, we continue working as normal like this, right? Now, number two, in terms of coordination, we do have coordination on the ground, Alex. Okay, we have alliances, we have networks, we have, clearly we're working like a social being, social organization. But again, those organizations and networks are not tuned necessarily for humanitarian purposes. Now, is that our fault or shortcoming? Maybe. I believe that each and every NGOs in the world, CSOs, must know one thing or two about humanitarian crisis as part of their life skills and survival. So that in that very rare occasion, when crisis happen, they could rise to the occasion, doing it better. They understand the principles, and they could have conversation with Manuel and Marina and their friends in a more productive ways. You follow? If we don't build that one during peacetime, we have no time. When the crisis happened already and international colleagues coming to the ground, they spend time to do assessment, to do a briefing, to introduce the humanitarian principles. You know how much time is lost for that. But if we invest during normal time, understanding our capacities for us to understand your capacities, and we hope it never happen. But when it happened, that wavelength is built already. Now, I hope I responded to your question with regard to capacity. Yes, we do have capacity, but they need to be fine-tuned so that it could respond to humanitarian crisis. Number two, we have coordination, but that coordination need to have another layer so that it allow us to communicate and work better with other elements who come and try to help us during crisis. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Puji. I think what I like about what you're saying is that it is also about remembering that when arriving in a country, when there is a crisis, um, there is already quite a lot happening. And how do we ensure that even if we don't speak the same language, not in terms of locution, but in terms of words and jargon we are using, we need to find how to function together. We need to figure out how to be complementary. I want to move to our next speakers, and I can see that we're having a great conversation, and we might be a bit behind time already, so I'm going to be fast. Before I introduce and ask a new question to our next speaker, I want to remind our colleagues online that you can ask questions, make comments on Slido. I'm not sure if we still have, yes, we have the hashtag at the bottom. So yeah, it says questions. It can be also comments. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be questions. And don't hesitate to write different entries, because you cannot write very long sentences on Slido. It's made to be short and concise. So we have heard, I think we're starting to see that progress is happening, that coordination is happening, not necessarily always very well coordinated, that resources are getting there, not completely enough. I want to go to Ségolène de Becco, who is the head of the regional office for ECHO, for Eastern and Southern Africa. And I want to ask her a bit, how as ECHO, or if as ECHO, they actually do engage in that regard, or if this is something that could be further developed, further invest on. Ségolène, over to you.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, very well.
Okay, very good. Well, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks a lot, Alex, for having me this afternoon in the talk. So yeah, maybe I will start a little bit from the global level, and then try to focus on the region that I cover, which is the Eastern and Southern Africa. So as you know, the localization agenda has been one of the key areas of action that was highlighted in the communication on humanitarian action that was adopted last year in March. And among others, the communication highlight the need to encourage consortia based on equal partnership, share responsibilities, funding between international and local responders. And in this communication, one of the key steps was to propose to have a guidance on the promotion of equal partnership with local responders. And that was very much highlighted yesterday at the high-level panel on localization. So the idea is to develop this guidance and that the process will first include a consultation with a number of stakeholders at all level, and the consultation will definitely also be in the field at the regional level and country level. This consultation has kind of been kicked off yesterday at the high level panel, and it's supposed to be really an inclusive process where we'll try to extract the recommendation and the good practices and the ideas from the field. So it's supposed to be really a bottom-up process, this guidance is supposed to touch on key issues such as equal partnership between international and local organizations, localized financing models, and enhanced participation of local actors in humanitarian coordination structure, and so it's supposed to be very inclusive. And what we have done at ECO level so far is that we have done an internal mapping of initiatives that we have across the globe, that are either fully or partially funded by ECO, and that have so far contributed in different ways to the localization of humanitarian aid. So we looked at the different elements of the localization agenda, which is, the whole capacity building, support to capacities, the involvement of the local actors in humanitarian response cycles, the whole participation to the coordination mechanism, the whole issue of equitable partnership, localized financing model, and the whole involvement of marginalized group and women-led organization, and the whole issue of risk sharing and related to safety and security inter alia. On coordination in particular, as you know, as you may know, but I hope you do, ECHO has been always very much supporting the whole coordination agenda. We support, directly OCHA. We support a cluster system. It's definitely we support also the different NGO forum. And platforms, and depending on the country, you might have, an NGO forum that might be both with international and local NGOs. So this is something that is very much on our agenda. And I think there, and we'll have to indeed brainstorm together on how to make that concrete and tangible. But I think really using the existing systems, and making sure that we find ways to promote, to boost the participation and the leadership of local partners in those existing mechanisms is really the way to go, and making sure that there is a real influence in the decision-making process throughout the project life cycle, but also, in deciding priorities, in identifying where, the humanitarian community should. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. I'm not
Sorry,
sure
because I was frozen. No, ensuring that that there is a real contribution to the decision making process, and that basically we have the right support to capacity to ensure that the local partners are really engaged in the whole coordination mechanism.
Thank you,
Over
Ségolène.
to you.
Thank you. I think, for a long time, ECHO has been a bit the bad guy when it comes to localization and local actors. We know that the funding and the financing is nowhere going to be changed. No, it's not going to be soon, if anything. But it's great to hear more and more positive voices and willingness to find out ways to make it better. And so there is this localization guidance. So for the people online who didn't know about this, I think that's an exciting moment also to engage with ECHO and to engage on what can happen with ECHO and to push also ECHO as a donor, as a partner, and to engage more with Global South organization, because at the moment they don't really, in terms of a more structured way of engaging. Not that they never talk to local and national actors, but also to see how there can be more financing, maybe in an indirect way, but to coordination mechanism focusing on local and national actors, not so much on international actors that are present in countries. So that's maybe something for us also to monitor and to look at and to contribute to continue to point out, because we have had very bad example from ECHO recently on localization in countries where the decision at the country level was more like in Pakistan to finance international organization in countries to research on localization than talk to coordination mechanisms which have been in place in the country for over 3 decades. So we still have here and there those elements that are a bit disappointing and sometimes make us wonder, okay, are we moving forward? Mm-hmm. So thanks for being one of these positive voice, Ségolène, and bringing that to us. I want to quickly turn to Virginie Lefebvre, who is also on our panel today. She is with AMEL, a national association, a national organization in Lebanon, which has been existing for 30 years, or maybe, yeah. More, so you'll tell us. My bad. And Virginie is the head of program and partnership in this organization, and she's also a committee member of a forum of national NGOs in Lebanon. So I think it would be great to hear your experience, Virginie, in this regard, in the committee, but also to touch maybe on some of the funding issue. I mean, Manuel was pointing out that flexible and predictable funding are critical, and we know that they are especially critical not only for project but also for this kind of work, the work that is not project based, but that is critical to make sure that voices from communities, voices for national NGOs, local NGOs are heard in the overall humanitarian space and beyond the humanitarian space. Over to you, Virginie.
Thank you very much, Alix. So you said it here. I'm today in two positions. First, I'm working with AMEL as a national organization, but I'm also sitting on the steering committee of the Lebanon Humanitarian and Development NGOs Forum, which facilitates the representation of 85 civil society organizations. And I believe this is quite important because often I'm being asked to comment on the reality of local and national NGOs, and I believe that there's no one single reality. We have certain national NGOs, and I would classify the organization I'm working with in this category, who are in a situation which is much similar to the one of international NGOs. For instance, we're leading consortia, we're receiving direct, flexible, predictable funding. But I'm also within the framework of my role at LHDF, the local NGO forum, interacting with smaller CSOs who are still not accessing overhead cost, predictable funding. So there, I think it is quite important to highlight this and not to have a one single reality approach. So that's going to be my first comment. A second comment in there, I wanted to say that over the past 10 years, I think that Lebanon is a good example where the situation has quite changed in terms of funding, enabling localization. We've been seeing great examples of multi-year agreements, of overhead being granted to local and national NGOs, with the example of certain UN agencies now giving us administrative costs or overhead, with the example of institutional donors who decided to have a localization window and to fund directly local and national NGOs in country. And I think that there, the fact that we have, unfortunately, a protracted crisis definitely also help us in having a multi-year planning. So that's the second note I wanted to make. I also wanted to say that often what I hear in conversation is stop qualifying localization as a matter of funding. True, It's not only about funding, it is also about complementarity. Many of you highlighted the importance of the power shift. However, and without the funding, particularly the predictable one and the flexible one, it is very difficult to have a meaningful say in all processes contributing to localization. So true, it's not only about having more money, but if you don't have the money, it's going to be very difficult to have the people, the human people who are going to make a difference in enabling the localization processes. In there, I believe that we have our role to play as local and national NGOs community in really making this meaningful power shift happening. Why? Because I'm always afraid that we would tick the box of saying, well, you know what, in country we have 2-3 national NGO co-lead, we have a national NGO forum, localization is happening. Yes, but those are a couple of actors. We need to have more. And as national NGOs, as local NGO forum, I think it's really also our role to have this peer-to-peer approach with the smaller actors to tell them, for instance, no, it's wrong. This international NGO partner does not give you admin costs. You have the right, you have the duty to ask for it. And this, we have our role to play as national NGOs. Indeed, we're not the only one to have our role to play. And I believe that donors and partners should also play a more active role in monitoring the partnership agreement to make sure that there's actual equality in those partnership agreements. It's not only about providing guidance to the partners, it's also about actually monitoring them with quantitative and qualitative data. I also think that we have a responsibility globally as humanitarian and development actors to say no sometimes. It is difficult and it's a choice to say no, right, to certain partnerships. But having, again, in 2022, certain actors having this approach of subcontracting shouldn't be happening anymore because it doesn't serve the affected communities, it doesn't serve localization, and at the end, I don't think it serves neither the other partners. So we have the duty to say no sometimes and to say, no, this is an unfair partnership. You're not giving us the means to actually working with the local communities. So please, no, it's not working. We cannot do this project this way. We have to co-design this project and we have to be clear about this, and it is a joint responsibility. One small note on the end, as I think some other colleagues mentioned, it is important to monitor our progresses against localization. In Lebanon, we're currently working, notably informed by the previous work which has been done by Mir on a localization framework, and a localization framework which is truly going to be owned by the local and the national NGOs. And I think that there we're going to have an actual tool to monitor regularly the progress beyond number of grants given to local and national NGOs, how much money is going directly and what are the results achieved with this amount of money, and how participative as well we are with the affected communities we're working with.
Thank you, Virginie. I want to ask you a very short, because we are very short in time, but a very, very short follow-up question. As Amel, I suppose you don't work only with humanitarian funding. You work also with different type of funding. Do you see different situations, especially around what we are talking about in localization, overhead, predictable, multi-year and earmarked funding? And do you think that there is maybe here something that we should explore more, that donors should explore more, for example, the EU, between their development money and their humanitarian money, but also other donors, to start learning from the other aid siloed sector, and how they have managed to move from a very project-based, top-down approach to a much more inclusive approach. Very short, sorry.
So from my experience in Lebanon, the difference is not between development and humanitarian donors, it's really among donors. So it really depends from one agency to another, from one country to another. And I would say it's not so much about the difference between the donor, it's about also the people you're working with. Unfortunately, and often I think our UNICEF colleague mentioned it, if the person changes, then the interpretation changes. And this is why I think that the headquarters also have an instrumental role to play to make sure that the people, the actual people they're sending to the field, also understand, and it's well structured and it's organically there, the signification of what is localization in practice. So I would say that it's really a matter of donors and of people rather than humanitarian development in terms of trend.
Thanks, Virginie. And you gave me the opportunity to say something I've always wanted to say, that it's also about donors and international organizations to build their own capacity internally to ensure that actually their policies, their commitments are really trickling down, and that it's not the work of local actors at the national level to then explain to the donor how they're supposed to function, which is never a really easy starting point in the conversation. So thanks a lot for that. Manuel, I want to turn to you, and I see the time, and I'm a bit horrified because we had planned to have much more questions and engagement. But Manuel, you have had experience in not only in the emergency, if I'm not wrong, and I wanted to see and to ask you if you're starting to see also in your current position how we can start looking at more complementarity between the different aid sector to really answer the needs, because we know also that the needs are evolving, that they are not the same than 15 years ago, than 10 years ago. So what has been your experience? What have you seen that will give us also ways of moving forward?
Thanks. Yeah, a great discussion, and yes, we won't have enough time, but so I'll be very brief. I think, one of the great advantages of working with local actors and local organizations in general, and it's true, UNICEF is also a development organization, right? So is that we're working with organizations that were there before a crisis ever happens and will be continued after that. So they know their community, they know the environment, and they can anticipate the shocks, and they can work on resilience. So I really think for me, this is the great added value also. One of the great added values of localization is how to work with organizations on preparing and reducing risk, on building resilience, and also on linking up, going out of the crisis, because these are the same communities, these are the same children, the same families that we need to help. So we're trying, one of the things we're trying is to get, and this is, to you donors in general, but more interest in preparedness in particular. We have created ourselves a couple of windows of funding, one we call First Action Initiative, and then there's a co-funding initiative. It's basically getting funds that we can put into country offices ahead of a crisis happening. And so this is important. We also have done a review of our humanitarian function and seen that clearly working better with local organizations, local actors early on. So having our partnership established, having our agreements established, and so that we can trigger the response early on, prepare and then trigger the response faster is going to be really important. And then the other thing we've seen is that we can, in some cases, really link what we're doing as humanitarian action into a longer term sectoral coordination. So for example, we can link our clusters, the cluster that we lead, with the sectoral coordination mechanisms in nutrition, in education. And we've done that, for example, in Somalia, where basically we're linking the households that actually were with malnourished children, so really getting the humanitarian assistance into kind of sources of food security, livelihood activities, strengthen community systems, and that. So really make that link. The same in DRC, where we use the humanitarian cash transfer at the beginning, is humanitarian cash transfer short term, to then getting actually women groups to really lead into small businesses and livelihood opportunities. So I think this is a great opportunity for us who want to make that nexus between development, humanitarian action, and actually peace and social cohesion. Local actors are crucial, and I think if we can make that link, and if we can work with you donors to make sure that we don't break that link because there's a different window of funding, I think that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Manuel. And I'll come to you, Ségolène, but not right now. For now, I want to go quickly to Puji and ask you, Puji. I know that the alliance you are convening is doing. Oh, it's so great to see you. The alliance that you are convening is doing a lot of preparedness. With really community-driven organization, not national NGOs. Do you see this kind of support available for the work you're doing, or is it all based on your on voluntary basis and resources that are really drawn from the communities themselves and not so much from external donors? And I will ask you to be short, Puji. I'm sorry.
Sure.
2 minutes.
Right. The Indonesian Alliance for Development and Humanitarian, no, Indonesian Development and Humanitarian Alliance is alliance of the 7 major networks with more than 800 NGOs and CSOs. As I said earlier, we work during normal time. So our resources are largely mobilized locally. And we see the emergence of the Islamic financing, which we're very excited about. Some part of that need to be better aligned with humanitarian principles because are not naturally compatible. We need to engineer a little bit of alignment. And majority of resources are that one, our capacities as well. But as I said earlier, Alex, there's also exciting opportunities for us to have more conversation with our international colleagues and have more alignment so that the resources, no matter how minimum, all right, when it's needed, it could be ready, it could be compatible, it could work together, right? And that can only build if we have more conversation. I'll tell you, to be honest with you, since the formation of the alliance, not many, only one international organization approached us. And I'll tell you, when the crisis happened, one local organization could be courted by more than 26 international organizations being assessed to death because they seem to be viable. But during normal time, only one. So that's my brief remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, there is a big gap, huh? That we can see a big gap, and that what Manuel is talking about is not yet completely transferred. It's happening, as innovative approaches, but it's not really part of the thinking and the programming. So I think that you're right. This is really a conversation to have much more on the financing of local and national NGOs.
But I have to say,
from
Alex,
an
though,
anticipatory.
yes, just to cut you short, individually, some of our organizations, of course, have established partnership with international partners, no? But not as
Yes.
alliance as such. That's the thing.
Yeah.
What we need to elevate that individual engagement into alliance level. That's then we multiply the potential tremendously. So the opportunity is here. We are here. We never go anywhere. So welcome to colleagues, and let's have more talk.
Wonderful. Thanks, Puji. Thanks a lot. Segolene, I'll come quickly to you. We received a question for you, which is a bit of a trick question, I think. If ECHO has any position in terms of transferring overheads to local partners as part of the agreement they have with their own partner, the ECHO partner, which are international organizations, is there a commitment or requests that when working in partnership with a local actor, they have to transfer overhead? That would be my first question, and you'll have very short time to respond. And the second question, because otherwise it's not fun. The second question is: do we see a sort of a movement in the European Commission, in the European Union, to sort of starting having more alignment between the very humanitarian funding in ECHO and the very development funding in, well, the new name, I cannot pronounce it, but in the development and peace, INSPA, yeah, that's not pronounceable. So do we see that, or is this still something that needs to happen, or do you see that in the region where you operate? And yes, you will have
2
minute
minutes.
and a half.
So I mean, coming back on the financing, I think more and more for us, what we have to see is indeed that when we are financing a consortium, it's a real consortium, it's a real partnership, and it's really, you know, let's say an equitable sharing of resources between the different partners of the consortium. I think more and more we're moving away from when we see, for example, that in a consortium you have in implementing partners that are more like, you know, kind of service providers. This is something that we will flag with our partners in the negotiation of the contract, to make sure that they have the means to operate, and that we're moving ahead away from just, you know, I won't say exploitation, but just making sure that the different partner of that consortium have the real means to operate. And this is something that we're doing at the country level when we negotiate partnership. It can happen also that we fund a bit more, you know, support cost in a contract, to make sure that it can complement other funding that a partner has. So this is something that really at the country level, colleagues are very much aware of, and are making sure that they have the needs to that everyone has the needs to operate. The means to operate. Sorry. On the relation with INPA, I mean, as you know, the whole Nexus discussion is a long-standing discussion that we have at the field level, almost, you know, on a constant basis. For me, it's really, first of all, it's good programming. It's a lot of common sense, and it's really about finding opportunities. And this can only happen when, you know, the different side of the house really know well each other, and the mandate, and the, you know, the timing of funding allocation and things like that. Do I have to
Is it
speak up, or?
happening? But my question is whether it is happening, because you're not really answering.
No, it is happening. I mean, I can tell
Okay.
you that at the field level in the different countries, the work and the dialogue
At
between.
the field, but at the global level, in terms of broader programming, is it something that we see evolving, or it's still very much separate?
No, I mean, I guess if you're speaking about a common pot of money coming, you know, from both sides, and working on, for example, the resilience building and things like that, we're not there yet, indeed.
Okay.
But in terms of policy dialogue and making sure that we seize opportunities, we have pilot project where we try to move forward on the Nexus agenda. So there are things happening also at the global level, definitely.
Thank you, Segolène. I'm going to jump quickly to Marina to see, to hear last word from you. If some of the conversation, especially maybe around the Nexus and the transition, have triggered some thinking or reflection from your side.
Thanks, Alex. So I think, first of all, I think it's clear that localization transcends development and humanitarian, as others have said. It's there before, during, after. Hence, you know, there isn't a sequence. We just have to be better, I think, at harnessing the advantages that we have as either humanitarian players or those that straddle both. And then, of course, there's the peace part. And we know that local players also, we haven't spoken to this, play a critical role. We have regional women's associations in Africa that have played a critical role in peacemaking in the Mana River Union, for example, and other places. So definitely, I think one is we need to learn from each other. We need to leverage our distinctive advantages. So, you know, if OCHA is a humanitarian player and does coordination in humanitarian context, still we also accompany RCs, HCs, and other contexts which are perhaps not purely humanitarian. So we have a role in, I think, infusing those good practices and taking them, making sure they're taken up in other places. I think sometimes development players can be less inclusive of local actors, sometimes more. So let's learn from each other. Others, like UNICEF, can actually straddle both, can do both humanitarian development and perhaps have a longer term perspective, and can really work on capacitating local organizations and really supporting the process. Donors are critical in all stages, whether they're humanitarian development. We do see an issue in terms of development funding. A lot of it is bilateral funding with governments, which we haven't even touched upon, so I'm not going to open that can of worms. But there are other issues there. So certainly, I think we all have a part to play. We need to link up. We need to look at our comparative advantages and make sure that we're aware that local players are there way before our arrival, and we'll be there hopefully after we've left. So we need to both be cognizant of what they are and mindful and give them the space, but also make sure that we are properly supporting them, that we can actually write ourselves out of a job, which is hopefully what we're all aiming to do. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you for concluding on that. I think that that's a very critical point. Yes, that's what we are aiming to. Manuel and Virginie, I mean, we are over the hour, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe Virginie, to share maybe something that has been triggered around around the last part of the conversation. If you want to conclude with us, a few words. You are still muted. Oh, you are unmuted.
Yes, sorry, we just got a power cut. I wanted to, I like it because there were different aspects. I wanted to end with a concrete and practical example. So it's not really triggered by what has been said, but it's a practical example. In Lebanon, thanks to overhead costs and flexible funding, we had 2 national NGOs who became sector co-lead. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because collectively we have some indicators toward localization. And I do really think that this is a clear justification of granting flexible and predictable funding, including overhead, to local and national NGOs. And it moves the discussion out of the funding. So I wanted to give this practical example because I think that there we have, I always feel uncomfortable that I have to justify why localization is important. And I think that giving this practical example shows that if we want to reach meaningful localization, which I'm assuming this is what we're all aiming at because it's contributing to aid effectiveness, it's contributing to accountability to affected populations, we need to have predictable, we need to have sustainable funding, and this will enable us to reach this, to reach a really meaningful localization, which is all about complementarity and meaningful participation.
Thank you, Virginie. Thank you so much for that. I think the concrete examples is what we need in seeing how the different pieces of the puzzles are coming together. Manuel, over to you for a word of conclusion from your end. If I know you are busy.
I've got to run, but I think Virginie's conclusion is the best. I have no problem with that. I think we should all subscribe to a meaningful contribution. I think for our case, we need to, I take on the challenge for UNICEF to actually make it go beyond the funding, but also I think, as a number of colleagues have made, funding is also important. So to really make sure that we're more predictable, that it doesn't depend anymore on that person or that moment, that there is really kind of a culture in the organization about partnering better with local organizations because it's in everybody's interest. In particular, in our case, it's in the children's interest. And then for you as donors, let's try to see how we can make that link that I was talking about earlier. So let's commit ourselves to a number of urgent steps rapidly, but looking forward to continuing the discussion. It's not just about a panel, it's about what we're going to do tomorrow, right?
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you so much for that. From my end, first of all, I want to thank all the partners and all because we are very lucky to have very good partners with NIR, and a number of them were on this panel, and I'm really thankful for the ongoing conversation, the ongoing exchanges. One of the things I'm hearing, and that's a commitment I'm taking, is that I keep on hearing we need to discuss more, we need to engage more and better. And I do believe that maybe this is not something we do efficiently. So that's really something I want to reflect. And Puji, I'll come back to you on this, and Marina as well. How do we do that? What kind of engagement do we need to make sure that we keep on understanding how we are evolving, what are the burdens, the challenges we are facing in moving forward? That's the first one. The second one is that I think there's a lot of myth around the funding from development and peace and humanitarian. And so we talk about the nexus, but there are not as many spaces where it is really discussed and explored. And I think that's really something we as NEAR, for example, could do more, because this is also who our members are. Our members are not humanitarian actors. Our members, as Puji has said, are women's group, youth groups, CBOs, local NGOs, national NGOs who are just taking a step and action where their community needs. So that's something I think we need to do better. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry, we have been a little bit over time. And I wish you a really good day, a really good afternoon, a very good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And we are looking forward to our next conversation all together. And next time, hopefully, we can also get some live questions and hear the voices from the different part of the globe. Have a great day. Thank you again.